Far away, in the heart of the Indonesian archipelago, lies the island of Flores. Its shape is long and narrow, stretching more than 300 kilometers from east to west, and never more than a few dozen kilometers across. This is not an island of broad plains and gentle hills. Instead, ridges rise steeply, and valleys fall away into tangled rainforest. The air is heavy with the scent of damp leaves, and the distant roar of the ocean is rarely far away. Flores is part of the Wallacea region and a chain of islands that have never been connected to the continents, even when sea levels were at their lowest. Here, across hundreds of thousands of years, life evolved in isolation. Plants, animals, and even humans adapted to a set of conditions unlike anywhere else on Earth. On many such islands, a strange pattern repeats. Large animals become smaller, and small animals sometimes grow larger. Scientists call this phenomenon island dwarfism and island gigantism. It is a rule shaped by limited resources, lack of predators, and the need for efficiency in a restricted space. In the deep past, Flores was a world of surprises. Towering reptiles, giant rats, and birds much larger than any living heron moved among the trees. In the rivers and open glades, dwarf elephants called stegodon grazed in small herds. These elephants were not the size of their mainland relatives. An adult might stand little more than a meter tall at the shoulder. In such a setting, the arrival of any new species would be a dramatic event, reshaping the delicate balance of an enclosed ecosystem. Geological forces made Flores both a refuge and a prison. Volcanic mountains rose from the seabed, their slopes covered in ash and fresh rock after eruptions. The soil was rich, but the terrain was harsh. Deep ravines cut through the forest, and rivers flowed quickly toward the sea. To the north and south, strong currents swirled between the islands, creating natural barriers that even strong swimmers could not easily cross. For most of its history, Flores was cut off from the outside world. Yet, at some point in the distant past, and perhaps hundreds of thousands of years ago, a small group of early humans managed to reach its shores. How they arrived is still uncertain. The straits between islands are wide, and the seas here can be treacherous. Some researchers suggest they may have been swept across by storms, clinging to rafts of vegetation. Others believe that even without modern tools, they may have crafted simple watercraft using wood and vines and paddled deliberately toward the horizon. Either way, their arrival marked the beginning of a unique evolutionary story. Over countless generations, these early settlers adapted to their new home. They became smaller in stature, more efficient in their use of energy, and highly skilled at surviving with the tools the island could provide. On Flores, there was no need for speed over long distances, no need for large, powerful bodies to fend off big predators. Instead, survival depended on careful observation of seasonal patterns, intimate knowledge of the land, and the ability to take advantage of every possible resource. The landscape itself shaped their lives. Along the coasts, narrow beaches opened to the sea, where coral reefs sheltered fish and shellfish. Inland, the forests provided edible plants, fruits, and materials for tools. The volcanic slopes grew thick with vegetation soon after each eruption, drawing animals to graze on the fresh growth. Small clearings offered space for temporary camps, but the steep ridges and deep valleys meant that moving through the island was never easy. The climate here shifted over time, sometimes slowly, sometimes abruptly. During glacial periods, global sea levels fell, but Flores remained an island. Cooler temperatures might bring changes in rainfall, altering the mix of plants and the animals that fed on them. During warmer periods, the forests would grow denser, the rivers more swollen, the air heavier with moisture. Life on Flores was always a matter of adapting to subtle changes, as well as to sudden, catastrophic events like volcanic eruptions. From a modern scientific perspective, the story of Flores is preserved not in written records but in layers of soil, rock, and cave sediment. In these layers, geologists and archaeologists read the traces of changing environments and the creatures that lived in them. Pollen grains reveal the shifting composition of forests. Ash layers mark past eruptions. Bones of long-extinct animals lie buried beside stone tools chipped from local rock. Each discovery adds a small detail to the picture of a world that once existed here. Even before the discovery of Homo Floresiensis, scientists had found evidence that humans had lived on Flores for far longer than anyone had expected. In 1998, tools more than 800,000 years old were uncovered on the island's north coast. These tools suggest that early humans, possibly Homo erectus, had already made the crossing and were shaping stone into sharp-edged implements. It is not known whether these earliest arrivals were direct ancestors of the later Hobbit people or whether different human groups reached Flores at different times. One mystery remains: why did these humans come here at all? Flores offers resources, but also great challenges. Some have proposed that their arrival was accidental, the result of natural events that carried them over the sea. Others suggest a deliberate journey that are perhaps driven by curiosity or the search for new hunting grounds. The truth may never be known, for no records survive, only the scattered traces left in stone and bone. From the moment of arrival, life on Flores would have been defined by balance. Every species on the island relied on the others, directly or indirectly. A small shift, a drop in rainfall, the loss of a key food source, or the arrival of a new predator, could ripple through the entire system. For the early humans here, understanding those connections would have been a matter of survival. Today, standing on the volcanic slopes and looking across the narrow valleys toward the sea, it is possible to imagine the island as it once was. The forests sway in the warm wind, the call of unseen birds echoes through the canopy, and the air smells faintly of ash from a distant vent. Beneath the soil lie the remains of a vanished world, waiting for the careful work of those who seek to understand how the Hobbit people came to be, and how, in time, they would disappear. Far away in the deep past, the first hobbits of Flores arrive, though no one can say exactly when or how. The sea around the island is restless, moving in endless tides and unpredictable currents. To the north lies Sulawesi, to the west Java, and to the east the long curve of Timor. Between them are stretches of open water that have never been bridged by land. Crossing here has always required a stroke of luck, a measure of courage, and a willingness to vanish beyond the horizon. These first arrivals are small in number, perhaps only a few families or a hunting band. The moment their feet touch the sand, they enter a world that will shape them in ways they could never foresee. The beaches are narrow, hemmed in by cliffs and dense forest. Behind the tree line, ridges rise steeply, leading to the volcanic spine of the island. The air is heavy, the sunlight filtered through layers of green leaves. At night, the sounds of unfamiliar creatures move in the darkness. The deep calls of giant storks, the rustle of giant rats in the undergrowth, and the slow, deliberate steps of Komodo dragons. Life here is rich but demanding. The island offers food, but in forms that must be understood and mastered. Small rivers run from the mountains to the sea, their banks fringed with edible tubers and palms that bear nutritious nuts. The coasts yield shellfish and small fish trapped in tidal pools. Farther inland, the dwarf stegodon graze on fresh shoots in the clearings, while flocks of birds move between feeding grounds. To thrive here, the newcomers must learn which plants heal and which harm, how to read the changing seasons, and where to find water in the dry months. Generations pass. Bodies begin to change. Over many lifetimes, the descendants of these first arrivals become smaller in stature. The pressures of island living, limited resources, no large predators to drive the need for size, and the constant challenge of finding enough food favor those who can survive on less. Muscles remain strong from climbing steep slopes and working stone, but the frame grows lighter. A fully grown adult might stand barely over a meter tall, yet move with skill and endurance through the tangled forest. Tools are shaped from local stone, river cobbles chipped into sharp-edged flakes and points. The rock of Flores is hard and fine-grained, producing blades that can cut, scrape, and pierce. Such tools are the key to hunting and preparing food. With them, the hobbits can butcher a stegodon, fashion digging sticks from hardwood, or prepare strips of plant fiber. Tool-making knowledge is passed down through close observation, as younger members watch and imitate the practiced hands of their elders. The island's geology offers more than just stone. Caves in the limestone hills provide shelter from storms and a place to store tools and food. Some lie near rivers, others high above the forest floor, reached by narrow paths along the cliff face. In these spaces, firelight flickers on the walls, casting shifting patterns on the rock. The smoke drifts upward through cracks in the ceiling, carrying the scent of cooked meat and roasted tubers into the night air. Living here requires more than strength and skill. It demands a deep familiarity with the rhythms of the land. Rain falls in heavy bursts, feeding torrents that swell the rivers and flood the low ground. Then the dry season comes. The soil hardens and leaves drop from the trees. The hobbits learn to move between seasonal camps, following the changing availability of food. They know which rivers run even in the dry months, and which high ridges catch the cooling winds when the heat builds below. The world beyond Flores changes too, though the islanders may never see it. Glaciers advance and retreat far to the north, locking up seawater and lowering the oceans. Yet even at the lowest sea levels, Flores remains separate, its surrounding channels still deep and swift. These currents keep the hobbits apart from other human groups for tens of thousands of years. Isolation protects them, but it also seals them within the limits of their home. One of the enduring mysteries is whether these first hobbits were alone on the island from the beginning. Fossils and tools suggest that early humans had been in this region for hundreds of thousands of years, perhaps arriving in separate waves. Were the hobbits direct descendants of Homo erectus from the Asian mainland, altered by long isolation? Or were they a different branch entirely, the last survivors of a much older lineage? The answers may lie buried beneath layers of volcanic ash and cave sediment, still waiting to be uncovered. Island living has its dangers. Volcanoes loom over the landscape, their peaks often shrouded in cloud. A distant rumble might be the first warning of an eruption, sending ash into the sky and fire down the slopes. Earthquakes shake the ground without notice, loosening rocks and sending landslides into valleys. Floods, droughts, and sudden storms can strip away resources in days. To endure, the hobbits must be resilient, shifting their habits and locations in response to each new challenge. For all the hardships, the island also provides moments of abundance. After a volcanic eruption, ash enriches the soil, and new plants sprout quickly. Fresh shoots attract stegodon, and hunting becomes easier. When rains fill the rivers, fish crowd into shallow pools, ready to be caught by hand or with simple traps. The forest yields fruit, honey, and edible leaves, while fallen logs shelter grubs rich in protein. Every part of the island offers something if one knows where to look. In time, the life of the hobbits becomes inseparable from the landscapes they inhabit. Trails connect the coasts to the mountains, worn by generations of feet. Stone scatters mark places where tools were made, and faint ash layers in caves hint at long-forgotten fires. Though their world is small, it is complete, holding everything needed for survival. Yet beyond the horizon, changes are unfolding that will one day reach even here, touching the island that has kept them safe for so long. Along the winding rivers of Flores, time leaves its marks in stone. The water moves slowly in the dry season, pooling in quiet bends where fish gather, and reeds sway in the breeze. When the rains come, these same channels swell and churn, carrying silt and fallen branches toward the sea. Along their banks, archaeologists many tens of millennia later will find the first solid traces of the hobbit's skill. Small, carefully shaped stone tools resting in layers of ancient soil. These are not crude or random flakes. Each bears the sharp edges and deliberate angles of a practiced hand. Some are simple cutting tools, their edges made by striking a cobble to remove thin, sharp fragments. Others are points or scrapers, suited for preparing hides or carving wood. The stone itself is drawn from the island's rivers and hillsides, selected for its fine grain and durability. Over generations, knowledge of where to find the best material becomes part of the group's collective memory. Tool-making is not a separate activity from daily life. It is woven into every stage of survival. When a stegodon is brought down, stone blades separate hide from flesh, cut meat into strips, and prepare bones for splitting. When plants are gathered, scrapers and knives strip bark, cut stems, or dig roots. A well-made tool can last through many tasks before it must be resharpened or replaced. Broken pieces are often reworked into new shapes, ensuring that no valuable material is wasted. Along some rivers, evidence shows that tool production was concentrated in certain locations, flat patches of ground near good stone sources and fresh water. Here, the ground might be littered with flakes and discarded cores, signs of repeated visits over centuries. Such places may have served as meeting points for small groups, allowing them to share news, exchange materials, or work together on larger tasks. The landscape around these rivers shapes the hobbits' movements. Dense forest can make overland travel slow and tiring, but following the waterways offers a natural guide through the interior. Rivers lead from the volcanic highlands to the coasts, passing through zones rich in different resources. In the highlands, cooler air and open slopes attract grazing animals. Farther downstream, forest edges yield fruits and edible plants. At the mouths, tidal flats and reefs provide shellfish and fish. By moving along these routes, the hobbits can take advantage of seasonal abundance in different parts of the island. The archaeological record suggests that their stone-working tradition changed little over tens of thousands of years. This stability may reflect a way of life finely tuned to its environment. On Flores, the same basic needs and challenges repeat with each generation. and the tools that worked well for one group will work just as well for the next. In such a setting, innovation is slow, but the knowledge is deep and precise. Every step of shaping a tool, thus from selecting the stone to holding it at the right angle for the final flake, is understood without words, passed on by observation and practice. One lesser-known detail from excavations is the discovery of stone tools far from their likely source material. In some cases, the rock used to make a blade is found only in the highlands, yet the finished tool lies in a coastal site. This suggests movement of materials across long distances, either by direct travel or through exchanges between groups. While the scale of these interactions remains uncertain, it hints at a social network that extended beyond a single valley or river system. Mysteries remain about the variety of tasks these tools supported. Some may have been used for purposes not easily preserved in the archaeological record, shaping wooden spears, weaving plant fibers, or working soft materials like animal sinew. Others might have been multi-purpose, shifting from hunting to plant gathering as needed. Without direct observation, these uses can only be inferred from wear patterns and experimental reconstructions. On a planetary scale, the period when these tools were being shaped was one of shifting climates. Ice sheets in the far north locked away vast volumes of water, lowering sea levels and exposing continental shelves elsewhere. Yet here in Wallacea, the surrounding seas remained deep. The shape of the coastlines changed only slightly, and Flores stayed apart from its neighbors. These conditions reinforced the Hobbits' long isolation, allowing their culture and traditions to continue largely undisturbed. In the quiet of the riverbanks, life unfolds at a slow pace. A group might camp for several days, hunting small animals, gathering plants, and repairing tools. At night, fires burn low, and the sound of water blends with the calls of nocturnal birds. Stone flakes glint faintly in the firelight, scattered on the ground where they fell during the day's work. The cycle repeats season after season, year after year, leaving behind layers of history that will one day tell the story of a people unlike any other. The persistence of these tool traditions raises questions about contact with other hominins. If modern humans or other groups reached nearby islands, would their different technologies have spread to Flores? Perhaps the currents and distances were too great for regular contact, or perhaps such encounters were fleeting, leaving no lasting imprint. For now, the evidence suggests that the Hobbits' stone-working skills developed independently, shaped entirely by the needs and resources of their island world. As rivers continue their patient work, cutting deeper into the land, they expose new surfaces where stone can be gathered. Each fresh outcrop is another opportunity, another resource to be used. For the Hobbits, these rivers are not just sources of water and food. They are the pathways along which their tools, knowledge, and lives flow, binding together the scattered communities across the rugged length of Flores. The heart of Flores is shaped by fire. Rising above the forest canopy, volcanoes mark the skyline, their slopes alternating between lush green growth and raw, exposed rock. Some peaks are broad and quiet, their summits worn by time. Others are sharp and restless, sending columns of steam into the air, even in calm weather. Life here is lived in the shadow of these mountains, where fertility and danger are bound together. For the Hobbits, the volcanic slopes are both a source of bounty and a constant risk. The ash that drifts down after an eruption enriches the soil, feeding dense vegetation. Plants grow quickly here, their leaves rich in nutrients, drawing grazing animals into the open spaces. The dwarf stegodon is a frequent visitor, moving in small herds across the fresh green patches. For hunters, these eruptions can be an advantage, concentrating prey in predictable areas. Yet the danger is never far away. An eruption can arrive with little warning. First, a deep rumble rolls beneath the ground. Then the air grows warm and still. Ash begins to fall, at first lightly, then in heavy curtains. Lava may pour down the slopes, burning everything in its path. Rivers choke with debris, and clouds of gas sweep through valleys. Such events can transform the landscape in hours, erasing camps and scattering groups. Despite this, the volcanic highlands remain attractive. The cooler air at higher elevations offers relief from the humid lowlands. Clearings provide sightlines for hunting, and the edges of lava flows expose useful stone for tool-making. Streams born from the mountains run clear and cold, cutting through layers of ash and rock to reach the lower forests. For generations, the hobbits learn the safest routes across the ridges and the most reliable places to find food and water after an eruption. Archaeological evidence suggests that settlements, or at least repeated campsites, were common near these fertile slopes. Layers of ash in cave deposits contain traces of hearths, stone tools, and animal bones, showing that people returned again and again despite the risks. In some layers, the remains of burned vegetation hint at landscapes suddenly cleared, perhaps opening new hunting grounds. In others, thick ash layers separate evidence of human activity, marking times when the land was uninhabitable. One lesser-known detail about Flores's volcanic environment is the role of mineral springs and warm ground near active vents. These spots may have provided constant sources of water and heat, even in cooler or drier periods. Steam vents could keep certain plants growing year-round, creating small pockets of abundance in an otherwise challenging season. While direct evidence of hobbits using such places is rare, the benefits would have been clear to any group familiar with the land. Mysteries remain about how volcanic activity influenced long-term survival. Did repeated eruptions cause local extinctions of animals, forcing people to move and adapt? Or did the rapid regrowth afterward offset the losses, making these cycles more of a disruption than a disaster? The archaeological record shows both patterns, long absences from certain sites and quick returns in others. The exact balance may have depended on the scale and timing of each eruption. On a planetary scale, the volcanism of Flores is part of a larger system that stretches across Indonesia, known as the Ring of Fire. Here, tectonic plates meet and grind, driving magma upward through the crust. Earthquakes and eruptions are inevitable, shaping islands, raising mountains, and shifting coastlines over millennia. For the hobbits, these forces are simply part of the background of life, as familiar as the changing seasons. The human story here also includes adaptation to indirect volcanic effects. Ash in the atmosphere can dim sunlight for weeks, slowing plant growth and cooling temperatures. Heavy deposits can alter river courses, block animal migration paths, and change the availability of fresh water. Hobbits living through such changes must respond quickly, shifting their diet, moving to unaffected valleys, or focusing on resources less sensitive to short-term disruption, like shellfish from the coast. In the rhythm of the island year, volcanic slopes play a recurring role. After an eruption, hunters and gatherers explore the edges of cooled flows, seeking stone, plants, and animals drawn to the new growth. When the slopes are quiet, they serve as corridors between valleys, offering easier travel than the dense lowland forest. Small caves and overhangs provide shelter from sudden storms. The mountain ridges also serve as landmarks, visible from far away, guiding movement across the island. Daily life near the volcano might include early morning foraging along the edges of open ground, searching for edible shoots or tracking the movements of grazing animals. Midday heat drives people toward shaded streams or the cooler heights. In the evening, campfires flicker against the dark slopes, their light merging with the faint red glow from vents high above. The scent of wood smoke and volcanic gases blends in the air, a reminder of both the resources and the risks present here. Even in quiet years, subtle signs of volcanic activity shape choices. A faint tremor underfoot, a warm patch of soil, or a sudden change in the taste of water from a mountain stream may prompt a shift in camp location. Knowledge of these signals is passed through generations, ensuring that groups can respond quickly to changing conditions. In a small population, this shared memory becomes a survival tool as vital as any spear or knife. From a distance, the volcanic highlands might appear forbidding, yet for the hobbits of Flores, they are an essential part of survival, a place where danger and abundance coexist, where the memory of past eruptions guides present-day decisions. In their long isolation, these small humans become as much a part of the island's cycle as the eruptions themselves, adapting not only to the forest and coast, but also to the restless heart of stone that beats beneath their feet. Across the open clearings of Flores, the dwarf stegodon grazes slowly, its small, sturdy frame moving between patches of young grass. Barely taller than a large pony, it is still the largest land animal on the island. Its curved tusks sweep forward, and its trunk coils delicately to strip leaves from low branches. For the hobbits, this animal is both a challenge and an opportunity. It is a rich source of meat, hide, and bone, but one that requires skill, planning, and cooperation to bring down. Hunting the stegodon is not an everyday task. Smaller game, fish, and gathered plants form much of the daily diet. But when conditions are right, perhaps when a herd lingers near a water source during the dry season, the chance for a larger hunt arises. Success here means food for many days or perhaps weeks, and materials that will serve through the seasons. The tools for such a hunt are simple but effective. Spears tipped with sharpened stone points, sturdy wooden shafts hardened in fire, and cutting tools prepared for butchering. The hunters know the terrain intimately, every ridge, every hidden gully, and every place where the ground becomes treacherous after rain. They watch the animals for days, noting where they feed and rest, how they move together, and which paths they follow between grazing grounds. On the chosen day, the group positions itself carefully. Narrow passes between volcanic outcrops, soft riverbanks, or patches of unstable ash can be used to slow or trap the animals. The aim is not to kill quickly in open ground, but to create conditions where the stegodon's size becomes a disadvantage. Once surrounded or forced into difficult terrain, it can be approached from multiple sides, with spears thrust into vital points. The danger is real. Even at its reduced size, the stegodon is strong enough to injure or kill a hunter with a single charge. A sudden trumpet call, the flash of tusks in the sunlight, and the ground trembling under heavy feet are reminders of the risk. Careful timing and coordinated movement are essential, and any mistake could scatter the hunters before the task is done. Once the animal is brought down, the work has only begun. Sharp flakes and blades are used to cut through the thick hide, separating skin from muscle. Long bones are split for marrow, tusks removed for later shaping, and meat sliced into thin strips for drying. Fat is collected for cooking and perhaps for sealing containers. Even the sinew has value, strong enough to bind spear points or lash tools together. Archaeological finds suggest that stegodon bones are often found in association with hearths and stone tools, supporting the idea of deliberate hunting and processing. In some layers, cut marks on bones show where muscles were separated, and fractures reveal where marrow was extracted. The scale of some bone accumulations hints at repeated use of particular butchering sites, perhaps places chosen for their proximity to water or shelter. One lesser-known detail is that stegodon hunting may have influenced group size and social organization. Bringing down such an animal requires more people than most daily tasks, encouraging cooperation between small family units. Shared success would strengthen bonds and create opportunities for exchange. Tools, knowledge, and perhaps stories passed on in the glow of evening fires. The mystery that remains is how often such hunts took place. Were they rare, once-in-a-generation events remembered long afterward, or part of a seasonal rhythm tied to migration or plant cycles? The archaeological record gives only partial answers, offering snapshots rather than a continuous record. Weathering, erosion, and volcanic activity have erased much of the evidence, leaving researchers to piece together the fragments. On a planetary scale, the presence of the stegodon on Flores is itself a story of adaptation. Descended from much larger mainland ancestors, these island dwellers shrank over thousands of years to fit their environment. Their smaller size required less food and allowed them to survive in an ecosystem with fewer large predators and limited grazing land. The same pressures that shaped the hobbits also shaped their prey, locking the two species into a long, delicate balance. When a stegodon hunt succeeds, the landscape changes for days afterward. The smell of blood and meat draws scavengers, giant storks, monitor lizards, and smaller carnivores. Fires burn steadily as meat is cooked or smoked. Strips of hide are stretched and dried. Bones are set aside for later use as tools or fuel. For a time, the camp becomes a center of activity, its resources supporting not just survival, but the maintenance of tools, shelters, and social ties. Over the generations, knowledge of hunting these animals becomes part of the cultural memory. Children watch from a distance as adults prepare spears and set out for the hunt. They learn the patterns of stegodon movement, the signs of their presence, and the safest ways to approach. By the time they are old enough to join, they have already absorbed much of what they need to know, ensuring that the skill persists through time. For the hobbits of Flores, the stegodon is more than just a source of food. It is a living part of the island's identity, a creature that shapes movement, cooperation, and even the rhythm of the seasons. As long as the stegodon herds move through the clearings, the hunters will follow, bound together by the pursuit of an animal that sustains life in a land shaped by isolation and change. Night falls slowly over Flores. In the fading light, the forest canopy darkens from deep green to a uniform shadow, and the air cools just enough to bring relief after the day's heat. As the last birds call from the treetops and the first insects hum into motion, small flames flicker in the gloom. The hobbits of Flores gather around their fires, the heart of their evening world. Fire is more than a tool here. It is a constant companion. Its uses are practical and immediate, cooking food to make it easier to chew and digest, driving away biting insects, and providing warmth during the cooler nights of the highlands. In the darkness of the forest, firelight creates a circle of safety. The glow keeps away some of the island's larger predators, including the slow-moving but dangerous Komodo dragon, whose bite can be deadly. Archaeological evidence from sites such as Liangbua Cave suggests that the hobbits maintained controlled fires. Charcoal fragments in the cave sediments, along with heat-altered stones, point to repeated use of the same hearths over many generations. Ash layers preserve the rhythm of these activities, periods of more intense occupation with heavy fire use, and quieter intervals when the site was abandoned or visited only briefly. Keeping a fire alive requires knowledge. Dry wood must be collected before the rains begin. Tinder, shredded bark, dried leaves, or resin-rich twigs is stored where it will stay dry. Fire-making methods are uncertain, but possibilities include striking stones together to produce sparks or using friction with a wooden drill and hearthboard. However it is lit, a fire is valuable enough that once started, it is carefully tended, often smouldering through the night, so that only a little coaxing is needed to revive it at dawn. Cooking with fire transforms the hobbit's diet. Meat from the stegodon or smaller animals can be roasted or boiled, making it easier to chew and increasing the release of nutrients. Tough plant fibers soften in the heat, and some toxic plants become edible after prolonged cooking. The smell of roasting food drifts through the camp, mingling with the earthy scent of smoke and the damp forest. The firelight also extends the day beyond sunset. After hunting, gathering, and tool-making, the hours after dark provide time for repairing spears, sharpening blades, or weaving plant fibers into cord. Tasks that require fine control are easier near the steady glow than in daylight filtered through thick foliage. Children might sit close, watching the skilled hands of their elders, learning by silent observation. One lesser-known detail from fire studies on Flores is the possible use of smoke for preservation. Slow smoking of meat over low flames could have helped extend the usefulness of large kills, particularly in a warm climate where food spoils quickly. While direct evidence of smoking racks or storage pits has not been found, patterns of burnt wood in some layers suggest controlled, low-intensity fires that may have served such a purpose. The mystery that lingers is how fire use began on the island. Did the first arrivals bring the skill with them, maintaining it through isolation, or was it developed independently after settling? Fire-making is an ancient human technology, but maintaining it in a humid tropical climate is a challenge. Interruptions, a storm that douses every ember, a long migration without access to dry fuel, could have forced groups to relearn or reintroduce the skill. On a planetary scale, the mastery of fire marks a turning point in human evolution. Across the world, from Ice Age steppes to tropical forests, fire reshaped the relationship between humans and their environments. It allowed expansion into colder regions, altered diets, and changed patterns of activity. For the hobbits of Flores, the benefits were the same in principle, but tailored to the unique challenges of their small island. Fewer nights of shivering in the highlands, fewer dangerous encounters in the dark, more reliable food supplies in all seasons. The location of fires on the island was not random. In open clearings, flames could be seen from far away, perhaps serving as a signal to others. In caves, the light bounced from the limestone walls, amplifying its reach and making even a small fire seem brighter. The smell of smoke in an enclosed space may also have reduced insect pests, a subtle but important advantage in a warm climate. At Liangbua and other sites, repeated hearth construction shows that some locations became favored gathering spots over centuries. The reasons may include proximity to fresh water, availability of fuel, and shelter from wind and rain. Over time, these places likely acquired layers of meaning within the community, not symbolic in the way of later human cultures, but important in the shared understanding of where life could reliably be sustained. Daily fire management is a quiet, deliberate process. In the morning, embers are stirred, and new wood is added until flames catch. During the day, the fire may be allowed to die down to coals, conserving fuel while keeping the heat for cooking or smoking. In the evening, flames are built high again for light and warmth. Even at night, someone may wake to feed the fire, ensuring it survives until dawn. For the hobbits, firelight defines the boundary between the familiar and the unknown. Within its reach, they work, eat, and rest. Beyond it, the forest is a realm of rustling leaves, distant calls, and unseen movement. The circle of light is small, but it holds the essence of their adaptation. An island species using one of humanity's oldest technologies to carve out a space of safety and stability in a world that can change without warning. In this way, the fire becomes as much a part of Flores as the rivers, forests, and volcanoes. It is a thread running through generations, linking past and present in a steady glow. Long after the last hobbit vanished, the layers of ash and charcoal in the earth would remain, silent evidence of nights spent under the canopy, where flames danced against stone walls and smoke curled upward into the dark, tropical sky. Deep within the limestone hills of western Flores lies Liangbua, a vast chamber carved by water over hundreds of thousands of years. From the outside, its entrance is partially hidden by forest. Vines drape down from the cliff above, and the sound of dripping water echoes faintly even before one steps inside. Within, the air is cool and still, and daylight filters in as a pale shaft from the wide opening, fading into darkness toward the back. For the hobbits of Flores, Liangbua is more than shelter. Its high ceiling and wide floor make it an ideal place to gather. Here, they are protected from heavy rains, fierce winds, and the sudden storms that sweep over the island. The cave's position on a slope gives a view over the valley below, allowing watch over passing herds of dwarf stegodon or the movement of other groups. The surrounding landscape offers easy access to fresh water from streams, and the nearby slopes hold both stone for tools and plants for food. Archaeological excavations have shown that this cave preserves an unusually long and detailed record of occupation. Layer upon layer of sediment holds charcoal from ancient hearths, stone tools, and animal bones. In some layers, the remains of giant storks and monitor lizards lie alongside cut-marked stegodon bones, suggesting that the hobbits brought their kills here to be butchered and cooked. The ash lenses left behind are evidence of fires that once flickered against the walls, filling the air with smoke and warmth. The deposits in Liangbua also reveal periods when the cave lay empty. Thick layers of sterile sediment, with no tools or charcoal, mark intervals when volcanic ash or changing climate may have made the area less hospitable. Yet time after time, the hobbits returned, re-establishing their hearths in the same favoured spots. Over tens of thousands of years, this repeated use left a pattern, an archaeological fingerprint of long-term familiarity with the site. One lesser-known detail from Liangbua is the presence of small pits dug into the cave floor. Their purpose is unclear. They might have been used for food storage, keeping edible roots or smoked meat away from pests. They could also have been part of fire maintenance, shallow basins for controlling coals and heat. Whatever their function, they show a degree of planning and modification of the living space, an adaptation of the cave environment to human needs. Liang Bua is also the place where, much later, the bones of Homo Floresiensis would be discovered. Small-bodied individuals with unique skeletal features, unlike those of modern humans. The find would astonish researchers, challenging assumptions about human evolution and dispersal. Yet for the hobbits themselves, the cave was not remarkable for its future fame. It was simply a dependable place in a landscape where security could never be taken for granted. Mysteries remain about the scale and nature of cave life here. Was Liang Bua home to a single extended group, or did multiple small bands use it at different times of year? Did they stay for long stretches, or was it mainly a base for short visits during hunts? The evidence suggests both possibilities: intense use in some periods, lighter in others. Without direct observation, the rhythms of occupation can only be reconstructed from the scattered traces in the soil. On a planetary scale, caves like Liang Bua hold some of the most complete archives of human and environmental history. Protected from the elements, their sediments preserve pollen grains, charcoal, and bones that would decay quickly in open sites. In this way, they become time capsules, recording not just the presence of humans but also the changing climate, the animals of the surrounding forests, and the volcanic events that reshape the island. Inside Liang Bua, the senses shift. The cave muffles the sounds of the forest outside, replacing them with the quiet drip of water from the ceiling. Light is uneven, bright near the entrance, dim and reddish near the hearths, and fading into complete darkness at the farthest reaches. Here, the hobbits might store items they wish to keep cool and dry, or simply avoid areas where footing is treacherous. The ground is a patchwork of trampled earth, ash, and stone, worn smooth in some places by repeated movement. Evening in the cave brings a different mood. As the firelight grows more intense against the darkening walls, shadows stretch and shift. The smell of cooked meat mingles with the mineral scent of the limestone. Sparks rise briefly before disappearing into the gloom above. The entrance remains a link to the outside world, a frame through which the moon or stars might be glimpsed, depending on the weather. One can imagine the practical routines that unfold here: hides scraped and stretched to dry in the warm air near the hearth, baskets woven from forest fibers, tools resharpened on smooth river stones. Ash is swept aside to keep the living space clear, and bones are carried to the edge of the slope to keep scavengers from approaching too closely. The choice of Liang Bua as a repeated home base speaks to the hobbits' deep understanding of their island. They knew where resources were reliable, where danger was reduced, and where shelter could withstand both seasonal rains and the ashfall from distant eruptions. In returning here generation after generation, they wove the cave into the pattern of their lives, making it as much a part of their world as the rivers, forests, and volcanic ridges. Even long after the last fire burned out, the cave would keep its secrets. Over time, sediment and debris would cover the traces of daily life. It would take thousands of years before new eyes saw the shapes of ancient tools, the marks on old bones, and the outlines of hearths buried in the earth. Liang Bua would emerge not just as a home of the hobbits, but as one of the most important windows into their vanished world, a silent witness to a way of life that endured here for tens of millennia. The climate of Flores is never truly still. Even on an island where the forests seem timeless and the mountains rise as they have for countless centuries, slow but powerful changes shape the world the hobbits inhabit. Over tens of thousands of years, shifts in rainfall, temperature, and sea levels alter the balance of life, touching every plant, animal, and human on the island. The most visible pattern is the alternation between wetter and drier periods. In wetter centuries, the forests press in thick and unbroken from the coasts to the highlands. Rivers run wide and fast, carrying sediment down to the sea. The air is heavy with moisture, and the canopy teems with life, birds calling at dawn, insects humming through the day, and a dense understory that makes travel slow and cautious. These conditions favor fruiting plant in broad-leaved trees and the animals that feed on them. Food is abundant, but so is the challenge of moving and hunting in such dense growth. In contrast, drier periods thin the forests, opening the landscape to patches of grassland and scrub. Rivers shrink to narrow channels, some disappearing entirely in the dry season. Hunting becomes easier in the open ground, but plant foods are scarcer, and water must be sought with care. The dwarf stegodon, able to graze on grasses and browse on leaves, adapts to both extremes, but smaller animals may vanish from the hobbit's reach during drought. These shifts are tied to larger planetary systems. Far to the south, the waxing and waning of Antarctic ice sheets affects sea levels, altering currents and regional weather. Seasonal monsoon patterns shift their strength and timing, bringing heavier rains in some centuries and long dry seasons in others. Even slight changes in ocean temperature can alter rainfall over Flores, tilting the balance between forest and grassland. For the hobbits, survival depends on reading these slow changes and adjusting their movements, diets, and settlement patterns accordingly. In wetter times, groups may range more widely along the rivers, taking advantage of fish, shellfish, and the plants that thrive in flooded soils. In drier years, they may stay closer to perennial springs in the highlands or along shaded valleys where water lingers. Their routes across the island adapt to where food and water can be found most reliably. One lesser-known detail from environmental studies of Flores is the evidence preserved in lake sediments. Pollen grains, carried by wind and water, settle to the bottom and build up in layers year after year. By extracting cores from these sediments, scientists can reconstruct ancient vegetation patterns, showing when the island was more forested and when grassland spread. These patterns match the archaeological record in subtle ways. Times of open landscape often coincide with different hunting strategies and changes in tool use. Mysteries remain about how abrupt some of these climate changes were. Were they slow enough that each generation could adapt without major disruption? Or did sudden shifts occur that strained resources and forced new solutions? In some cave sequences, rapid changes in the types of animal remains suggest that certain shifts may have been swift, altering the available prey within only a few decades. The coastline of Flores also changes with climate. During glacial periods, when ice sheets lock up vast volumes of water, sea levels fall. The beaches extend far beyond their modern limits, exposing wide coastal plains. Rivers stretch farther before meeting the ocean, and tidal flats expand, rich in shellfish and fish. These new areas offer temporary abundance, but they vanish again when the seas rise in warmer periods, reclaiming the land and pushing shorelines back against the forest. For the hobbits, these cycles create both opportunity and loss. A newly exposed coastal plain might be a source of food and open space for hunting, but it is also temporary, lasting only as long as the cooler climate persists. Returning to a favored fishing ground after the sea has risen may reveal nothing but waves against the rocks. In this way, the island teaches flexibility. No location is guaranteed to remain the same. In wetter centuries, heavy rains feed the volcanic slopes, encouraging landslides and altering river courses. A familiar path to a hunting ground may be blocked overnight by a wall of rock and soil. In drier centuries, springs may run low, forcing longer journeys for water. These constant adjustments shape the Hobbit's mental map of their island, building a deep knowledge of alternate routes, seasonal refuges, and places that remain reliable in all but the most extreme conditions. On a planetary scale, the period of the Hobbit's existence overlaps with major global climate fluctuations, the later stages of the Pleistocene, when the Earth shifted between glacial and interglacial states. While these changes were less extreme in the tropics than in temperate zones, they were still enough to transform ecosystems, redistribute species, and influence human survival. Flores was never connected to a mainland, but it was not immune to the pulse of global change. In the Hobbit's daily lives, climate change is experienced not as an abstract force, but as a series of local signs. The flowering of certain trees earlier or later than expected, the arrival of migratory birds, the drying of a familiar stream. These are the cues that guide choices about where to hunt, gather, and camp. Elders who have lived through more than one cycle of wet and dry pass on their observations, helping the next generation recognize patterns that will not be complete for decades. Evening after evening, as they gather by their fires, the hobbits live within these rhythms. The forest edge may be closer this year, the grasslands wider, the air drier, or perhaps the rains have been heavy, and the rivers are fuller, carrying fish in greater numbers. The cycle is never fixed, yet it is familiar, a shifting backdrop against which life continues. In adapting to this constant change, the hobbits become part of the island's long story, as enduring and as adaptable as the land itself. On Flores, the hobbits share their island with creatures that seem almost as improbable as themselves. Some are giants in miniature form, others are predators of remarkable size. Each plays a role in the delicate web of life, shaping the strategies of those who must survive here. The most formidable of these neighbors is the Komodo dragon, the world's largest living lizard. On Flores, as on a few nearby islands, these reptiles can reach lengths of 3 meters and weigh over 70 kilograms. They are patient hunters, relying on stealth and sudden bursts of speed. A Komodo dragon may wait motionless for hours, blending with the dry grass or the shade of a tree, before lunging at prey with powerful jaws. Even a single bite can be fatal to animals much larger than the hobbits, for the wound often becomes infected, weakening the victim until it can be taken down days later. For the hobbits, awareness of the dragon's presence is constant. Tracks in the dust, the sharp smell of a recent kill, or the sudden silence of birds can all signal danger. Camps are chosen with care, often on higher ground or in caves where a large reptile cannot easily approach. Fires are kept burning at night, and food scraps are disposed of away from living areas to avoid attracting unwanted visitors. Not all large animals here are predators. Among the island's birdlife is the giant marabou-like stork, Leptoptilos robustus. Standing over 1 meter tall, with a heavy bill and broad wings, it is a scavenger and opportunistic hunter. In open ground, it may snatch small animals, fish from shallow water, or scraps from a fresh kill. Archaeological evidence from Liang Bua shows that these storks sometimes ended up as prey themselves, their bones bearing cut marks from stone tools. But their size and alertness would have made them challenging to catch. Another remarkable resident is the giant rat Papagomes, weighing up to 1.5 kilograms. These rodents live in burrows or among rocks, feeding on seeds, fruit, and small invertebrates. They are not dangerous, but they are a valuable source of meat and fat. Hunting them likely required patience and the use of simple traps or quick strikes with throwing sticks. Their abundance may have helped sustain the hobbits in leaner times, especially when larger prey was scarce. One lesser-known detail from Flores' paleontological record is the possible presence of small crocodiles in some of the island's waterways. Fossil remains suggest they once lived here, though it is unclear whether they overlapped in time with the hobbits. If they did, rivers and wetlands would have carried an extra layer of risk, requiring caution during fishing or water collection. Living alongside such varied animals shaped not just hunting practices, but also movement across the island. Areas frequented by Komodo dragons might be avoided except when necessary, while regions rich in giant rats or seasonal bird gatherings would be favored for foraging. Knowledge of where and when these animals appeared was part of the mental landscape every hobbit carried, a map built from experience, observation, and shared memory. Mysteries remain about the exact interactions between hobbits and their animal neighbors. Did they actively compete with the dragons for prey, arriving at a kill to drive the reptile away with fire and noise? Or did they mostly avoid such confrontations, taking only what they could hunt or scavenge without direct conflict? The archaeological record offers hints but no certainty. Scattered cut-mark bones suggest occasional competition, but the balance of risk and reward would have made such encounters rare. On a planetary scale, the coexistence of humans with large reptiles, giant birds, and oversized rodents is unusual. In most parts of the world, humans, whether modern or ancient, encountered megafauna shaped by cold environments or open plains. Here in Wallacea, the mix of tropical climate, isolation, and evolutionary drift created a community of species found nowhere else. Each evolved to fit the island's constraints, just as the hobbits did. The presence of these animals also influenced tool design and hunting methods. Spears with heavier, sharper points might be used for defense against a charging reptile. Lighter projectiles or traps would suit the pursuit of small mammals. In both cases, success depended on an intimate understanding of behavior, where a Komodo might bask in the morning sun, when a rat would leave its burrow, or how storks followed seasonal changes in food supply. In daily life, encounters with these animals could range from routine to dramatic. A morning foraging trip might pass the fresh tracks of a dragon, sending the group to a different stream. Later, a sudden flurry of wings might signal a flock of storks taking flight from a nearby clearing. In the evening, the rustle of movement beyond the firelight might bring everyone to stillness until the source, friend, foe, or mere shadow could be identified. The ecosystem's balance was fragile. If a volcanic eruption reduced vegetation in one area, prey animals might move elsewhere, followed by predators. Prolonged drought could concentrate all species around the few remaining water sources, increasing the likelihood of encounters. In such times, adaptability was the key to survival, and the hobbits' long familiarity with their neighbors would have been tested. Over generations, the hobbits and the island's giant creatures lived in a shifting relationship, sometimes hunter and prey, sometimes competitors, and sometimes simply co-inhabitants of the same rugged landscape. Each species followed its own needs and instincts, yet their paths inevitably crossed in the small, self-contained world of Flores. To live here was to accept that the island's animals were neither constant allies nor constant threats, but part of the same cycle of change that shaped the forests, rivers, and mountains. The Hobbit's survival depended on reading this living map, understanding not just the land, but the creatures that moved upon it, and knowing when to approach, when to retreat, and when to simply watch from the shadows. At some point in the long history of Flores, the island's isolation begins to waver. Across the surrounding seas, other humans, anatomically modern people, move through Southeast Asia, spreading along coasts and islands in ways that seem sudden in the archaeological record, whether drawn by curiosity, necessity, or chance. Some of these travelers may have reached the shores of Flores, stepping into a world already shaped by the hobbits over tens of thousands of years. How they arrived is uncertain. The channels between islands are wide and often treacherous, their currents strong enough to sweep a small craft far off course. Perhaps they came deliberately, paddling dugout canoes from a nearby island, guided by knowledge of currents and landmark. Or perhaps storms carried them unexpectedly, scattering them across unfamiliar coasts. Whatever the case, the arrival of new people would have changed the island's balance in ways both subtle and dramatic. Archaeological evidence for direct contact between modern humans and Homo Floresiensis is scarce and debated. No site has yet yielded tools unmistakably associated with both groups in the same undisturbed layer. Yet the possibility is difficult to dismiss. Even a brief overlap in time could have allowed competition for resources, introduction of new hunting methods, or the spread of unfamiliar plants and animals brought by travelers. For the hobbits, encountering outsiders, if it happened, would have been an event without precedent. Their lives were shaped by familiarity, known trails, predictable seasons, animals whose habits were deeply understood. The arrival of humans with different tools, bodies, and behaviors could disrupt that stability. Spears tipped with finely worked points, nets for fishing, or strategies for hunting. Large animals might shift the balance of competition. One lesser-known detail from regional archaeology is the pattern of changes in tool technology on nearby islands around the time modern humans are thought to have arrived. In some places, new forms of blades and points appear, made from stone types not previously used. On Flores, however, the Hobbit's tool tradition remains relatively stable, suggesting either that contact was minimal or that they chose not to adopt the newcomers' methods. This resistance could reflect confidence in their own well-adapted tools, or it could mean they simply never had sustained interaction. If contact occurred, it may not have been purely competitive. In other parts of the world, interactions between human groups sometimes involved exchange of goods, materials, or knowledge. A traveler might share a novel technique for hafting a spear point in exchange for guidance to a water source. Yet without shared language or long-term trust, such exchanges would be rare and fragile. In a small island environment, even short-lived cooperation could leave faint but lasting traces in the archaeological record. Mysteries remain about whether modern humans brought new species to Flores. On other islands, travelers introduced dogs, pigs, and cultivated plants, sometimes unintentionally carrying rats and invasive weeds. Such arrivals could have altered the island's ecology, displacing native species and reshaping the food web the hobbits depended on. Even without direct conflict, environmental change driven by outsiders might have placed new pressures on the small-bodied inhabitants. On a planetary scale, this period marks one of the final great expansions of our species, Modern humans, already present in Australia by at least 65,000 years ago, had crossed major water gaps, adapted to a range of climates, and encountered other hominin species along the way. If they reached Flores, the meeting would have been part of a much broader wave of dispersals that transformed ecosystems and human histories from Africa to Oceania. The possible arrival of outsiders would also have psychological dimensions for the hobbits. Even if they saw only distant signs, footprints on a beach, a strange campfire across the bay, the awareness that other beings like themselves existed beyond the horizon could have altered their perception of the world. Such awareness might lead to caution, curiosity, or avoidance, depending on the nature of the encounters. Daily life for the hobbits during this time may have carried new uncertainties. A familiar hunting ground could suddenly hold unfamiliar tools or the remains of animals butchered in an unfamiliar way. A coastal fishing spot might bear signs of recent human use, even though no one from the local group had been there. In such situations, mobility becomes an advantage. The ability to shift camp, seek new routes, and adjust resource use to avoid competition. If contact was hostile, the consequences could be swift. On a small island, even a slight reduction in available food or a series of failed hunts could strain survival. If it was neutral or cooperative, the effects might be slower, but still significant. Over time, the sharing or competition for resources could influence settlement patterns, toolmaking, and even diet. The question of overlap between hobbits and modern humans remains one of the most debated aspects of Flores prehistory. The youngest confirmed hobbit fossils date to about 60,000 years ago, while evidence for modern humans in the region reaches similar ages. Whether the two groups met in person or missed each other by centuries remains unknown. Yet in either scenario, the arrival of modern humans in nearby waters marked the beginning of a new phase in the island's story, one in which the long-standing isolation that shaped Homo Floresiensis could no longer be guaranteed. In the quiet of the island's forests and caves, the hobbits continued their routines, gathering tubers, hunting small game, tending fires at night. But beyond the line of the sea, change was moving closer. Currents that had long kept Flores apart could not hold forever, and in the shifting patterns of the region's human migrations, the island's future was already being set. In the balance of life on Flores, the dwarf stegodon holds a central place. For tens of thousands of years, these small elephants have provided the hobbits with meat, hide, bone, and fat, resources that sustain their communities and shape their movements. But at some point in the island's later history, this relationship comes to an end. The last stegodon falls, and with it, a key part of the hobbit's survival system disappears. The reason for the stegodon's extinction on Flores remains uncertain. Climate change, human hunting pressure, and habitat disruption may each have played a role. Periods of reduced rainfall could have thinned the vegetation the animals depended on, while the arrival of new predators, including, potentially, modern humans, might have increased hunting intensity. Volcanic activity could also have destroyed critical grazing areas, cutting off the herds from water or seasonal feeding grounds. Whatever the cause, the loss of the stegodon represents a profound change, but these animals are not easily replaced in the diet. They are a concentrated source of calories, and their large size means that a single, successful hunt can support a group for days or weeks. Without them, the hobbits must adjust, turning more heavily to smaller game, plant foods, and fishing. This shift is not simply a change of menu, It is a reconfiguration of daily life. Archaeological evidence reflects this transition. In layers dating to after the stegodon's disappearance, cut-mark bones of smaller animals become more common: giant rats, monitor lizards, and birds. Fish bones and shellfish remains increase in number, suggesting that rivers, lakes, and coasts become more important food sources. Stone tools suited for butchering large animals give way to smaller, more versatile flakes and points that can be used for a wider range of prey. One lesser-known detail is that the loss of the stegodon may also have reduced the availability of certain secondary resources. Stegodon bones, for example, are large enough to be split into long, strong pieces suitable for tools or digging implements. Tusks can be shaped into durable handles or cutting edges. Without these materials, the hobbits would have needed to find substitutes, perhaps turning more often to hardwoods or smaller animal bones, which might not last as long or serve as well. The mystery of timing remains. Did the stegodon population collapse quickly within a few decades, or did it decline slowly over centuries? The archaeological record gives mixed signals. In some areas, stegodon remains vanish abruptly, while in others, they seem to taper off. The difference could reflect local variation in environment or hunting pressure, but without more complete sequences, the exact pace of extinction is hard to determine. On a planetary scale, the disappearance of large animals in island ecosystems is a familiar pattern across the world. Many species of island megafauna have vanished following the arrival of humans, especially when combined with climate change. From giant tortoises in the Indian Ocean to flightless birds in the Pacific, the loss of such species often reshapes the entire food web. On Flores, the end of the stegodon era marks a similar ecological turning point. For the hobbits, the practical effects would have been immediate. Large group hunts, events that required coordination and cooperation between multiple family units, may have become rarer. Without the need to plan such hunts, social structures might have shifted towards smaller, more mobile groups focused on foraging and trapping. Seasonal movements could have changed as well, with less emphasis on tracking herds and more on following plant cycles or fishing opportunities. The absence of the stegodon also alters the landscape in subtle ways. Without their grazing, certain open areas may gradually fill with shrubs and young trees. Trails worn by their movements could fade into the undergrowth. Predators that once depended on scavenging their remains might decline or change their diets. Even the volcanic clearings that drew both stegodon and hunters could take on a different character, becoming more overgrown and less predictable as food sources. In daily life, the hobbits adapt through diversification. Traps are set along rodent paths, spears are carried for smaller game, and nets or baskets may be used to collect fish and shellfish. Tubers, fruits, and nuts gain greater importance, though gathering them often means traveling farther or knowing more seasonal locations. Knowledge of edible plants and their preparation becomes an even more critical part of survival, passed carefully between generations. Such adaptation is a testament to the hobbit's resilience, but it comes with costs. Smaller prey yields fewer calories per hunt, requiring more frequent effort. The risk of going without food for a day or more increases, especially if weather or volcanic events disrupt normal foraging. In this leaner world, efficiency and flexibility become the most valuable skills. The ability to switch between resources, to change plans when a familiar stream runs dry or a foraging area is unexpectedly empty. The story of the last stegodon is not just one of loss, but of transformation. The hobbit's way of life once centered on an animal that shaped their hunting strategies, tool use, and seasonal movements, shifts toward a more varied and perhaps more fragile balance. The island's ecosystem, too, moves into a new state, with different species rising in importance. Though the stegodon would never return, its memory may have lingered in the patterns of movement and the choice of certain places. A clearing once favored for hunting might still be visited, not for the elephants that no longer graze there, but for the fruiting trees that now grow in their absence. The paths they once trod might still be the easiest routes through the forest, kept open by the occasional footfall of human travelers. In the archaeological layer, the moment of disappearance is marked not by a single event, but by the quiet absence of certain bones, tusks, and tools. Yet to the people who lived it, the loss would have been felt directly in the meals no longer possible, in the hunts that ended empty-handed, in the long walks to gather enough food for the day. In the delicate balance of island life, the fall of the last stegodon reshaped the future in ways that would ripple through the remaining chapters of the Hobbit's story. Across the history of Flores, volcanic eruptions have been both a source of renewal and a force of sudden destruction. For the Hobbits, these events are woven into the fabric of life, expected in the long run, yet unpredictable in the moment. When the mountains awaken, the rhythm of the island changes, and places once alive with the warmth of hearths can fall silent overnight. The first signs may be subtle, faint tremors that ripple through the ground, a low rumble that seems to come from nowhere, the scent of sulfur drifting on the wind. Sometimes these warnings pass without incident, and life continues as before. But other times, the signs build into something far greater. Clouds form over the volcanic peaks, dark and heavy. Ash begins to drift down, coating leaves, streams, and skin in a fine, gritty layer. The sky dims even at midday, turning the forest into a shadowed world. For people living near the slopes, the danger is immediate. Ash can make breathing difficult, irritate the eyes, and contaminate water sources. Heavy fall can snap branches and collapse shelters. If lava flows or pyroclastic surges descend from the mountain, there is no safety except distance. Groups abandon camps, moving quickly toward lower-risk areas, caves far from the vent, coastal zones beyond the reach of debris. In these moments, familiar trails may be blocked by fallen trees or deep ash, forcing detours through dense forest. Archaeological layers on Flores capture the traces of these events. Thick bands of volcanic ash, sometimes several meters deep, separate periods of human occupation in caves like Liangbua. Beneath one layer, hearths, tools, and bones show a lively record of daily activity. Above it, nothing appears for decades or centuries until a new layer of soil and debris builds up and people return. These gaps speak to the scale of disruption. When the land is uninhabitable, the hearths go cold. One lesser-known detail is that not all eruptions are catastrophic in the same way. Smaller events, while disruptive, can create conditions that draw people back quickly. Ash enriches the soil, encouraging fresh plant growth that attracts game. Streams, once choked with debris, eventually carve new channels that may provide easier fishing. In these cases, the absence from a favored site might last only a few seasons before signs of occupation return to the archaeological record. Mysteries remain about how much advance warning the Hobbits could recognize. Some volcanic signs are clear: ground shaking, clouds of ash, but others are subtle, and some eruptions occur with almost no precursor. Without written records, the only way to preserve this knowledge is through direct experience, passed from one generation to the next. Perhaps elders told of dangerous slopes where camps should never be built, or certain valleys where ash once buried the forest. On a planetary scale, volcanic activity in this region is part of the wider tectonic system known as the Sunda Arc, where the Indo-Australian plate dives beneath the Eurasian plate. The result is a chain of volcanic islands stretching across Indonesia, each shaped and reshaped by fire. Over tens of thousands of years, this process builds mountains, alters coastlines, and occasionally wipes away entire communities. Flores, lying directly on this arc, is both a beneficiary and a victim of these forces. In the wake of an eruption, the landscape may seem alien. Forests are stripped of leaves, their branches draped in pale ash. Rivers run thick with silt, sometimes shifting course entirely. Beaches may be littered with pumice, light enough to float on the waves. For the hobbits, the first task after returning is to assess what remains usable. Water sources must be checked for contamination. Hunting trails must be cleared or replaced. Plants that once provided food may be gone, while others may sprout in abundance from the newly fertilized soil. Daily life during recovery involves constant adaptation. Food may be scarce until animal populations recover, forcing greater reliance on stored or preserved supplies, if such reserves exist. Fishing may take on new importance, especially if terrestrial game has been driven away or killed. The search for tool-making stone may also change, as flows cover old quarries but reveal new sources. Every choice is guided by the altered map of the island, and each step rebuilds the connection between people and place. Some areas never recover in the same way. A fertile valley may become a barren plain of rock, too slow to support the plants and animals that once lived there. Other areas may become more attractive than before, with open ground for hunting or access to fresh water in new channels. In this way, each eruption rewrites the geography of survival, creating new opportunities alongside its losses. Even the social patterns of the hobbits may shift in response to volcanic cycles. Groups that once occupied separate valleys might come together temporarily in safer zones, sharing resources and knowledge. New alliances may form, and old territories may be abandoned. In the long term, these patterns could influence where settlements are placed, which routes are traveled, and how widely tool-making traditions are shared. The hearth, the center of daily life, is a silent casualty of these events. In periods of abandonment, the fire pits go cold, their stones scattered or buried. Ash and debris settle over them, sealing in the traces of the last meal cooked there. When archaeologists uncover these features tens of thousands of years later, they find a freeze frame of life interrupted, tools left where they fell, bones still bearing cut marks, the outline of a fire no one returned to feed. Yet the return is as much a part of the story as the departure. In time, the hobbits come back to slopes once emptied by fire and ash. They build new hearths, nap fresh tools, and hunt in the regrown clearings. The memory of danger remains, but so does the pull of fertile ground and familiar shelter. This cycle of abandonment and return, loss and renewal, is written not just in the geology of Flores, but in the lived experience of those who made it their home. In the end, the eruptions are not simply disasters. They are part of the island's pulse, shaping its landscapes, resources, and the ways in which its inhabitants live. For the hobbits, empty hearths are not the end of the story. They are pauses in a long, ongoing conversation between people and the restless earth beneath their feet. The disappearance of Homo Floresiensis remains one of the most enduring mysteries in human prehistory. For tens of thousands of years, the hobbits lived on Flores, adapting to its forests, rivers, and volcanic slopes. They weathered climate shifts, eruptions, and the loss of key prey like the dwarf stegodon. Yet at some point, their traces vanish from the record. No new hearths, no freshly knapped tools, no bones in the cave sediments after a certain horizon. The question is not only how they lived so long in isolation, but why they eventually disappeared. Several possible causes have been suggested, each supported by fragments of evidence but none proven beyond doubt. One theory focuses on environmental change. Even subtle shifts in rainfall and temperature can alter the balance of food and water on an island. A prolonged dry period could have reduced the abundance of edible plants, driven animals to other regions, and strained the resources that sustained small human groups. On a small island, such pressures can be more severe than on a continent, leaving little margin for recovery. Another possibility involves competition with other humans. If anatomically modern humans reached Flores, as evidence from nearby islands suggests they might have, their presence could have altered the balance of survival. New hunting techniques, more efficient tools, or simply greater numbers could have made it harder for the hobbits to obtain enough food. Even without direct conflict, competition for the same animals, plants, and water sources might have tipped the scales. Volcanic activity is also a candidate. Large eruptions can destroy vast areas of habitat in a matter of days, forcing survivors to relocate. If such an event struck during a time of already scarce resources, it could have been the final blow. The archaeological record of Flores shows several thick ash layers that coincide with periods when evidence of human activity becomes sparse or absent, though direct links to extinction are difficult to confirm. One lesser-known detail is that the disappearance of Homo Floresiensis might not have been a single, abrupt event. It could have been a gradual contraction of their range, with groups retreating to smaller and smaller refuges as conditions changed. In this scenario, the hobbits might have persisted in remote valleys or along certain rivers for generations after disappearing from better-known archaeological sites. Such survival would leave only faint traces, easily missed, in the current record. The mystery deepens when we consider their resilience. For hundreds of millennia, the hobbits adapted to the challenges of isolation. They endured repeated volcanic events, fluctuating climates, and changes in available resources. Their disappearance, then, suggests a convergence of pressures, environmental, ecological, and possibly human, that together exceeded their ability to adapt. On a planetary scale, their fate mirrors that of other hominin species. Neanderthals in Europe, Denisovans in Asia, and other now extinct groups each survived for long periods before vanishing within the past 50,000 years. In many cases, their disappearance coincided with the spread of modern humans, rapid climate shifts, or both. Homo Floresiensis may be part of this broader pattern, an island example of a global process of hominin turnover. In daily life, the path toward disappearance might not have been obvious to those experiencing it. One year's hunting might yield less than expected, a familiar plant might fail to fruit in a dry season, a volcanic slope might lie barren for longer after an eruption. Over time, these small shortages accumulate, If children survive in fewer numbers, if illness spreads more easily in a weakened population, if key knowledge is lost when elders die, the resilience of the group can erode quietly without a single moment marking the end. Archaeologists search for signs of these pressures in the sediment layers. A drop in the diversity of animal remains might signal reduced hunting options. Changes in tool size and shape could reflect adaptation to smaller prey or different materials. Increased use of coastal resources might indicate a shift toward fishing as land-based food became scarce. Each of these clues adds to the picture, but none yet explains the whole. The unanswered questions remain as important as the evidence itself. Did modern humans and hobbits ever meet face to face? If they did, what form did that contact take? Hostility, avoidance, or occasional cooperation? Were disease and introduced species part of the equation, as they have been in later island histories? Could the hobbits have survived in a form we have not yet recognized, their traces hidden in unexplored caves or remote landscapes? One thing is certain: when Homo Floresiensis vanished, a distinct lineage of humanity ended. Their disappearance narrowed the diversity of the human family tree, leaving only Homo sapiens to carry forward the legacy of our shared genus. For scientists, their loss is a reminder of how fragile survival can be, even for species that seem well adapted to their environments. On Flores today, the forests still cloak the volcanic slopes. Rivers still cut through limestone valleys, and caves like Liang Bua remain cool and dark. Yet somewhere beneath the soil and ash lie the final traces of the hobbits, perhaps the last hearth they tended, the last tools they shaped, the last bones of a meal shared before the end. Discovering these would not only answer questions about their fate, but also bring us closer to understanding how they lived until that moment. The puzzle of their disappearance is not simply about loss. It is also about endurance, the tens of thousands of years in which they thrived in one of the most challenging environments imaginable. The fact that they survived so long suggests a depth of knowledge and adaptability that should not be underestimated. Whatever the cause of their final disappearance, their long presence on Flores remains one of the most extraordinary chapters in the human story. Beneath the quiet surface of Liang Bua Cave lies the evidence that brought Homo Floresiensis to the world's attention. For decades, the sediments here had been yielding stone tools and animal bones, telling of an ancient human presence. But in 2003, excavators uncovered something different. A small skeleton unlike any modern human, yet too recent to be from a distant, archaic past. This was the first nearly complete fossil of the species now known as Homo Floresiensis. The individual, later nicknamed LB1, was an adult female who stood barely over 1 meter tall. Her skull was small, with a brain size of about 400 cubic centimeters, closer to that of Australopithecus than to Homo sapiens. Yet the shape of her face, her teeth, and her limb proportions showed a mix of primitive and derived traits, a combination not seen in any other known species. Alongside her lay stone tools as sharp and effective as those made by larger-brained humans, proving that brain size alone does not define capability. The bones were remarkably well preserved, protected by the stable environment of the cave. Careful excavation revealed more than just LB1. Other partial remains from different individuals were found in subsequent seasons, all sharing the same small stature and distinctive features. These finds confirmed that the Flores hobbits were not diseased modern humans or children, but a separate species adapted to their island home. One lesser-known detail is that the LB1 skeleton showed signs of injury and age-related wear, suggesting she lived long enough to experience physical decline. This hints at a social structure where individuals who could no longer hunt or gather as efficiently might still be supported by their group. While the evidence is limited, such survival beyond peak physical fitness often implies some degree of communal care. The discovery immediately sparked debate. How could such a small-brained human produce sophisticated stone tools? Where did they come from? Were they descendants of early Homo erectus who had undergone extreme island dwarfism? Or were they from an even earlier branch of the genus Homo, preserved in isolation? Genetic material has so far eluded recovery due to the hot, humid environment, leaving the question open. Mysteries also remain about the full range of their anatomy. The fossils from Liangbua represent only a handful of individuals. Differences in limb proportions, skull shape, and pelvic structure could hold clues to their evolutionary history. But more complete skeletons are needed. Other caves on Flores and nearby islands may yet hold such remains, waiting for careful excavation. On a planetary scale, the discovery of Homo Floresiensis reshaped our understanding of human diversity in the late Pleistocene. It showed that as recently as 60,000 years ago, the world hosted multiple human species, not just Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans, but also small-bodied island dwellers whose ancestry might stretch back over 1 million years. It underscored the fact that human evolution was not a simple, linear path, but a branching tree with many survivors and many dead ends. The bones themselves reveal adaptations to life on Flores. The short legs and long arms may have been well suited to moving through dense forest and climbing steep terrain. The small body would have required less food and water, an advantage in an environment with limited resources. The curved toe bones suggest agility in uneven landscapes, while the robust wrist bones speak to a lifetime of tool use. Excavations at Liangbua have also uncovered a wealth of contextual information. Layers above and below the Hobbit fossils contain volcanic ash, animal remains, and plant material. These show that the hobbits lived alongside Komodo dragons, giant storks, and giant rats, and that they endured significant environmental changes during their time on the island. The association of tools with cut-marked bones confirms their role as active hunters and foragers. One particularly intriguing find is the presence of tools in layers older than the Hobbit fossils, suggesting that their ancestors had been on Flores for hundreds of thousands of years. This raises the possibility of an even deeper history, with earlier forms of humans arriving and adapting long before the individuals at Liangbua lived. For scientists working at the site, every fragment is valuable. A tooth can reveal diet and developmental patterns. A piece of leg bone can show muscle attachment and activity level. Even the sediments themselves, when analyzed for pollen and microfauna, can reconstruct the environment in which the hobbits lived. Together, these pieces create a picture of a small, resilient population perfectly adapted to its island home until whatever combination of factors led to their disappearance. The global reaction to the discovery was intense. Headlines around the world dubbed them Hobbits, a name that captured public imagination but sometimes obscured the scientific significance of the find. For researchers, Homo Floresiensis became a case study in how much we still have to learn about human origins, and how easily long-held assumptions can be overturned by a single extraordinary discovery. In daily life on Flores today, the cave is quiet. The excavations have left precise squares cut into the floor, their walls showing the layered history of occupation and abandonment. Visitors can stand where LB1 lay buried for tens of millennia, surrounded by the same limestone walls that sheltered her kind from wind and rain. Outside, the valley stretches toward the horizon, much as it did when the hobbits walked here. The bones beneath these slopes speak not just of anatomy, but of persistence, of a population that survived in isolation for longer than many human cultures have existed. They also speak of fragility, for in the end, nothing in the record shows their continued presence beyond a certain point. What remains is a silent archive, a testament to a way of being human that is no longer found in the living world, but endures in stone, soil, and the careful records of those who seek to understand it. When the story of Homo Floresiensis reaches its end, the island of Flores remains, green, mountainous, and restless under the pull of its volcanoes. The rivers still cut through deep valleys, the forests still close over the ridges, and the winds still carry the scent of rain and ash. Yet the people who once shaped stone tools in the shade of liang bua, who hunted dwarf stegodon across volcanic clearings, and who kept the night at bay with the steady glow of their hearths, are gone. What the hobbits leave behind is not visible in the living world. Their legacy lies in the silent record beneath the soil, layers of ash and charcoal, the scatter of stone flakes, the bones of animals they hunted. These traces are small and scattered, but together they tell of a population that endured for tens of thousands of years in one of the most isolated human habitats on Earth. One lesser-known detail is that some of the youngest deposits in Liangbua still contain stone tools similar to those used by the hobbits, even though no skeletal remains appear in the same layers. This raises the possibility that small groups lingered longer than the fossil record currently shows, living in places that have yet to be excavated. If so, the final moments of their existence may have been quieter than we imagine, not a single dramatic event, but a slow fading from the island's story. The mystery of their disappearance is unlikely to be solved by a single discovery. Instead, it will come from many small pieces, a bone fragment here, a tool there, a layer of sediment that reveals a sudden environmental change. Each addition will narrow the possibilities, but perhaps never remove all uncertainty. On a planetary scale, the Hobbit's legacy is one of perspective. Their existence reminds us that our species, Homo sapiens, is not the inevitable outcome of human evolution, but one branch among many. As recently as 60,000 years ago, the world was shared by multiple human species, Neanderthals in Europe and Western Asia, Denisovans in parts of Asia, modern humans spreading across the continents, and the small-bodied Homo Floresiensis surviving in their island home. Each had its own adaptations, its own solutions to the challenges of survival. For scientists, the hobbits expand the range of what it means to be human. Their small brains, once thought incompatible with complex tool use, challenge assumptions about the link between brain size and capability. Their anatomy, a mosaic of ancient and modern traits, shows that evolution does not move in straight lines but in branching paths, shaped by isolation, climate, and chance. For Flores itself, their legacy is less abstract. The places they inhabited, the caves, riverbanks, and volcanic slopes, are still part of the island's living landscape. Some of the trails they once walked may still be followed today, though now by farmers, hunters, or children gathering firewood. Plants that once grew in the open spaces created by their fires may still thrive in those clearings. Even the Komodo dragons and giant rats, survivors from the Hobbit's time, still move through the forests, unaware of the human species they once shared the island with. Mysteries remain about how much of their culture was unique to Flores and how much was part of a broader heritage carried from earlier ancestors. Did they have seasonal patterns of movement? Did they return to certain sites year after year? Not just for resources, but for familiarity? Without language or art preserved in the archaeological record, such questions are difficult to answer. Yet their long persistence suggests a stable and well-adapted way of life, tuned to the rhythms of the island. In daily life, their legacy is preserved most clearly in the science that studies them. Excavations at Liangbua continue to refine the chronology of their occupation, while surveys across Flores search for new sites that might hold fossils. Advances in analytical techniques, from ancient DNA recovery to microfossil analysis, promise to extract more information from the same sediments and bones. Each year brings the chance of a discovery that will shift the boundaries of what we know. If the hobbits left no direct descendants, they still left a mark on the human story. Their survival into the relatively recent past means that our species and theirs were neighbors in time, even if not always in space. The fact that they lived on long after many other archaic humans had disappeared speaks to their resilience, their deep knowledge of their environment, and perhaps a measure of luck in avoiding the pressures that swept away others. As the sun sets over Flores, casting long shadows across the ridges and valleys, it is possible to imagine the island as it was in their time. The forests stir with the calls of birds, the air holds the scent of damp earth, and somewhere, a small fire glows in the mouth of a limestone cave. Around it, figures move in the half-light, small in stature, quick and deliberate in their work, entirely at home in a world that to us would seem remote and wild. That image is, of course, a reconstruction built from fragments and careful inference, but it is also a reminder that these people were real, that they lived and breathed and made choices within the constraints of their world. Their disappearance did not erase the fact of their long tenure on Flores, nor the lessons they offer about adaptation, survival, and the fragility of existence. In the end, what the hobbits leave behind is not a monument or a legend, but the quiet testimony of endurance. They remind us that human history is larger and more varied than the story of our own species alone, that the path of humanity includes many ways of being, many experiments in living, some of which lasted for hundreds of millennia before coming to an end.